One-Eye Jacks was, and still is really, unlike anything else around. Any other Western, any other movie from '61, any other movie, period. So, what is it? What else could it be, though? Because it's the one film directed by Marlon Brando, a story of betrayal and vengeance. And when it came out, we were all so excited. Of course, it's the first film he had directed. We expected the unexpected, and that's what we got. The picture is adapted from a novel by Charles Neater, a Mark Twain scholar, and it was based on the story of Billy the Kid. And Brando originally had Sam Peckinpah to write the adaptation, and Stanley Kubrick was to direct. But Brando wound up working with the writer Guy Trosper and ultimately directing the film himself. And he worked, of course, improvisationally. And he found moments with his actors that, of course, with the improvisation, you couldn't really have gotten any other way. And everything is consistently surprising and fresh in this picture. And in many ways, the film represents a sort of bridge between two eras in movie making. The production values of old Hollywood and the emotional values of the new Hollywood. Interestingly, for me and for many film scholars, One-Eye Jacks was the last Paramount picture shot in VistaVision. Every film at that time, once VistaVision was used at Paramount, every film made at Paramount had to be in VistaVision. But this was the last one that was shot in VistaVision. And it gives the film this tremendous depth and clarity. This was lost during the years after the film fell into the public domain. I mean, the quality of the images not only suffered, they were non-existent, and certainly so did the performances. I have to tell you that with this VistaVision camera and shooting the way he did improvisationally, he took a very long time in production, went way over budget. It was really, I think, a very expensive picture. The rumored original cut or story was about 5.5 hours or so, but I don't know where the rest of that footage is. Maybe one day it'll show up. But he waited, for example, up in Monterey, waited for the right waves to appear on the seashore, and it was. I think you'll see he was right.
Oh well, okay. So I'm really pleased to be able to introduce finally a restoration of One-Eye Jacks. VistaVision was a very special process. The film you're going to see was the last film shot in VistaVision. This was the end. It's 1961. It's very sad, but the different gauges just worked out. It was much simpler, cheaper, faster. Anyway, this film is based on a novel by Charles Nader, apparently a Mark Twain scholar. Really, it's a familiar story. It's based on the story of Billy the Kid. Frank P. Rosenberg, bought the project, the book, and interestingly enough, hired Sam Peckinpah to write the screenplay. And once they felt they had a good script, they gave it to Brando, who wanted to do the picture. He accepted it, and he worked with Peckinpah on the script. And they brought in Stanley Kubrick to direct. Kubrick had, I think he had just come off Spartacus. It was about coming over. You know, he was sort of mentored by Kirk Douglas in Paths of Glory and Spartacus. Spartacus, ultimately, for Kubrick, wasn't the best experience. Brando wound up bringing in Guy Trosper to work on the script. And after pre-production, I think really close to the beginning of shooting, that's when Kubrick realized he wasn't going to stay on the picture, and he left. He went to England and never came back. At that point, you couldn't tell Brando anything, I would think. He's going to direct himself, and he really should. It's not, I should say simply, it's not a matter of shooting a one-act play, let's say, or even a three-act play in a small room. This is visually stunning, what he did. This is the only film directed by Marlon Brando. The world, the cineasts and the entire theater culture, cinema culture around the world, Hollywood, all waiting for Marlon Brando to direct a film. I remember even in Film Comment at one point, they suggested that Brando direct the Book of Job. That's what Film Comment was. I mean, film culture film culture, Jonas Mekas' group. That's why it was so great. The Book of Joe Brando, what would he do? Wow. You know, it'd be great, you know. But he did this, a Western, right? And the stories began. He waited hours and hours for, shockingly, I say that sarcastically, for the right waves to come in Monterey. So the horses would go by when they were on their horses. It'd be yes, that's what you do. You wait for the waves. You wait for, or if you don't want to wait, you get there at the time the waves are there and you're all ready to go, but that wasn't the way it was working. The equipment was enormous. It was kind of a cross between the old style of production and the new styles that were going to come in the 60s. And it also has a kind of, the essence of it is of the old Hollywood in a way. Charles Lang photographing, Hugo Friedhofer music. Even the images of Brando at the end waving goodbye on the horse. It has a mythology to it in a way that cries very much to, cries back very much to pretty much the end of the Westerns until Peckinpah really finished it off in the mid to late 60s. The romance of this is quite unique. There are shots in it that are extraordinary. When it went, I was lucky enough to see it in VistaVision at the Capitol Theater, and I actually took a 35mm camera in and took some frames off the screen, which we try to use later to get the aspect ratio right. Because how this came about was that for years really couldn't see the film. I had bought a couple of IB prints, 35mm prints some years ago, which, by the way, one of them was used for the color restoration on this picture. The thing about it was that Steve Spielberg called me. He said, "Marty, did you see this new DVD of One-Eyed Jack?" I said, "There was this new one out?" I said, "Because there's been some very bad copies, because this is the worst." And it was German subtitles. The image was absolutely appalling. And he said, "We've got to do something. Why can't this thing be restored?" The thing about One-Eyed Jacks, at that time, let alone waiting, the stories of waiting for the waves, people were talking about endless hours of shooting. And what's remarkable about this picture, it's unlike any other Western because of the intensity and the power of the actors, the way they're directed, the way they're framed against the landscape and within these houses, these sets. But the intensity and the energy of the actors just burst out of the edges of the screen. I mean, they come out of Death of a Salesman and Streetcar Named Desire. It just slips out somehow, and they don't seem to be something that the camera could control. Carl Malden gives one of his greatest performances as Dad Longworth. And I got to know Marlon Brando a little bit over the years, and I said, Dad Longworth reminds me of Jerry Falwell in this picture. Brando, he never really felt that the film was successful. We told him we had loved it, and he's out, it wasn't really. But I don't know whether that's just you know, kind of humility about the picture, because when it did open, I believe it was not well received. It was not well received at all. Again, it has a throwback to the romance of the Western, yet there was a kind of different sort of energy about it, a brooding energy, which is beautiful. Also, and this is sad, we tried, but I don't think anyone could find it. And there were stories of the original cut being 5.5 hours. Now, you know, you hear that about Greed, you hear that about, well, Novecento was 5.5 hours, was really, but at this time, you didn't throw a Western at 5.5 hours. And we had wondered if any of that footage was to be found. I don't believe that could be a myth. It's just sometimes things start out and say the original, especially today when you say the original director's cut, that's usually a rough cut that nobody should see. Then you take things out, you don't put them back in. If the studio takes them out, that's different. That's different. In any event, I'm really pleased that this has finally been done. It got to the point where Spielberg would be looking at something in LA, he'd call me, we'd put it on an iPhone or iPad or something, and he said, "What about this shot? No, is it too much red?" And that sort of, we went back and forth, and the biggest problems were, what was the actual aspect ratio? It's a very special film. Many of its scenes and lines of dialogue from Brando and Ben Johnson and Timothy Carey. Anyway, I do hope you enjoy. Thank you very much.